So welcome. If you're here for your first time, my name's Christian. I am the pastor here and excited to see you. I hope I get a chance to meet you on your way out. And for everyone else, glad to see everybody here. We finished our series on the parables last week, so that is finished. And today, oftentimes between teaching series, we like to do series because we can string stuff together and have a focus that allows us to kind of move the needle in our life instead of just like 52 random ideas. But in between them, I usually take them as an opportunity to talk about something specific. And so today, because the next week we start 100 hours of service, I just want to talk a little bit about the one part of our vision. So we're going to talk about seek, love, and care for people like Jesus does is our vision statement. And the care part of that is this call that we feel. And in fact, if you go read the New Testament, especially if you read the Gospels and you read, one of Jesus's major emphasis was the poor and the people who have less than us, the people who are disadvantaged or hurting. And in fact, you can read the whole Bible and see themes of the kingdom of God leaning towards those who are oppressed. And this is why when we planted the church, we said, like, we need to be about some things. You know, you can just plant a church and there's like 1,000 things that you can focus on, but we want to be about a few things. So seek, love, and care. That the care part represents that we will, and we say it this way, like seek is we will lean towards people who don't know Jesus. The love is we will lean towards each other and God. And the care is we will lean towards the poor and the hurting in our community. We have one of our sayings is, if we ceased to exist as a church, would our community miss us? And not just the Christian community. We're talking about like the community we actually live in. Would the community miss us? And so this is what we're going to talk about today. We want to talk about how serving others can change our lives. And listen, we could go a lot of directions with this teaching. I could talk about how Jesus says that he did not come to serve, he did not come to be served, but to serve and give his life as a ransom for many. We could talk about Jesus as the model servant and that we're supposed to serve like Jesus serves. Or we could talk about this overarching biblical theme of what I'm going to call biblical justice. And there's a whole teaching series in that we'll do someday. But from the very beginning to the very end, there's this biblical justice. And I know the word justice can get a little sticky politically for us these days, but biblically, that word, I mean, we had that word before politics did, okay? That's our word. Biblical justice about taking care of the orphans and the widows and, relieving people who are being oppressed and having a voice that speaks up. So we could talk about biblical justice. We could talk about Jesus being a servant. There's a lot of angles we could take. We talk about how each person is created in the image of God. That's a bedrock theological principle of Christianity. And so every person, whether they are, super, super wealthy or, living on the streets, going through a really hard time, whether they've got their life together or everything's falling apart, it doesn't matter, whether you feel comfortable around them or you don't, they are made in the image of Jesus. And that image bearerness is something that we therefore should serve, right? We serve each other because each person is valuable and has dignity because they're created in the image and likeness of God. So, but we're not going to do any of those. Those are all ideas that I had, but I'm going to go this way instead. So serving others will change your life. And what's really exciting is today we're going to have a couple people speak so you don't have to listen to me the whole time. Okay, I'm glad you didn't clap. That makes me, no, all right. But sometimes I think it's really good to hear from others in our family. And so we're going to do that today, okay? So serving others will change your life. And the idea is obviously we serve people because we're hoping it has an impact in their life. But the reality is that God calls us to serve each other, not just because it's going to have an impact in other people's lives, but because he knows it's good for us. He knows that it's powerful in our life, right? There's the verse where Jesus says, give and it will be given to you. Give and it will be given to you. And then he uses kind of some language we might not understand today. A good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over will be poured into your lap. For the measure you use, it will be measured to you. And that's imagery from an agriculture society where they would, fill your basket with whatever it is that you're getting. And then they would press it down and shake it so they could put more in. And they press it down and shake it so they could put more in until it was overflowing. You could fit as much in there as you can. That's how God wants to give back to us when we give. Give and it will be given to you, like this picture where I'm just going to give you as much as I can. For the measure you use, it will be measured to you. There's a biblical principle that when we give and serve, so when we serve out of our time and our energy, out of our giftings, out of our talents, out of our money, like that when we give and we live a generous lifestyle, that there is something biblically that comes back to us. Now, it doesn't come back to us always the way we think it would, or the way we want it to, or the timing, or any of that. Okay, it's not like there are some preachers who might, for instance, preach that if you give financially, God will give you tenfold back. I don't think that that's guaranteed anywhere in Scripture. Okay, but I do believe when we are generous, that God is generous back with us. Now, that might be with His presence, it might be with His wisdom, it might be with people that surround us in our life that we are so grateful to have. I mean, there's so many different ways that God can bless us. So don't get narrow focused on, God, you must bless me in this one specific way. Okay? So I want to talk about two ways that we are changed, okay? That we serving others changes us. But first, I want to acknowledge a really important part of this, okay? And that is that serving others isn't easy. So I've called several people this week and said, would you be willing to share? And a number of people voiced the same thought, which was, I'm not sure if I should share because it's hard. Like, I don't think about serving other people. Like, I'm saying, can you tell about how Jesus has changed your life through serving other people? And they're like, well, honestly, when you say serving other people, what I think is how hard it is. The first thing that comes to mind is how difficult it is. And honestly, it even challenges my faith at times. And so that's biblical. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. In Galatians, it tells us to not become weary or tired of doing good. If doing good was easy, we wouldn't get tired of it. Do not grow weary doing good, for in a proper time you will reap a harvest if you, what? Do not give up. So the harvest of God, like the blessing back, is delayed often, and it could be delayed a long time. And the effort we put in to serve is hard. It's difficult. When we are literally serving other people the way Jesus calls us to, our hearts will get broken. We will hurt. We will sacrifice time and energy, and the reward will seem like it doesn't match the amount of effort we put in. There will be disappointment, frustration. Like, that is the road. Jesus doesn't call us to like this super easy, like, serve and everything's great all the time. And you give 5 minutes, I'll give you an hour. You give $5, I'll give you $1 million. Like, oh, well, He calls us to this, to walk in His footsteps, where He came as a suffering servant. And there are times in serving other people where it is just hard. There's time when it just stinks. And I think, like, sometimes in churches, and I'm not saying all churches, but sometimes in churches, the stories you hear from stage are the good ones. You hear when we prayed for someone and they got healed. And rarely do you hear in a church that when you prayed for someone and they didn't get healed, and yet they remained faithful to Jesus for 40 years. It's easy to tell the story of, like, I served and God changed my life. But, like, maybe sometimes we need to hear the story of I served and it's so hard, and sometimes I think about quitting. And so at CityLight, kind of from the beginning, we've purposed to share both of those stories because we see God's grace both in the miraculous and in what I would call the sustaining grace of God. There's times when God comes in a wave and major things happen, and it's so easy to point to and say, there's God. And there's other times when we just go one foot after the other through life, but neither one's better. They're both Jesus working in and through us. So I asked a friend of mine, her name's Maggie, to share. She's not loving the on stage idea, so we recorded this ahead of time. And Maggie is fostering a little boy. And has been for about 1 year and 2 months. She's known she wanted to foster for a long time, and she went through the training. And then 2 weeks after she was approved, she got this little boy. And so I asked her to share. And initially, when I asked her to share, she said she didn't think she could speak to what I was asking her to speak to because life's been really, really hard lately. And I said all that I just said to you to her, and I said, I think if you're willing, would you be willing to share? So she shares. And it's raw. And it was so raw that when we were done, I was like, you should watch that back and see if you really want people to see that. And she watched it back and she prayed about it. And I think this shows the trust that she has in our family. So I want to just share with you Maggie's story. And it's about 5 minutes long.
Well, I think first and foremost, it's totally one thing to, like, I wanted to be a foster parent for so long, so I've studied, I did a lot of research, I was able to, like, meet with a lot of foster families and ask a lot of questions and see them parent firsthand. And it's one thing to watch and see, and it's a completely different thing to live out. And it when you're watching, you can go home, and now like my home is infiltrated by a toddler who is like flipping over tables and is very messy. um, so I think it was one thing where I was like as prepared as I could have been, and I still feel like I'm 16 years old and I don't know what I'm doing all the time. Um, and then I I imagine myself as a parent, and I did all of the classes, and I am trained in how to be like trauma informed, and I feel like the head knowledge is one thing, and then living out the emotions of raising a child who has been like impacted by trauma is so different. So, and then I feel, oh my gosh, I told myself I wouldn't cry, which is really funny. I actually practiced this conversation so I wouldn't cry, which is hilarious because now I'm crying in front of a lot of people. So, I think the biggest thing, and this was the reason why I didn't want to like have this conversation, is I'm just angry all the time. I'm so mad all the time. No. Okay, sorry, I'll get it together. Um, but I'm like mad that there's a need to foster. I'm I'm mad that like I can't just fix him, and um I'm mad that I feel like a bad parent all the time. Like I feel like I don't know what I'm doing. And then I also feel like um I'm very aware that I'm like a sinful person, and on top of like what he's already lived through, he's gonna be like impacted by my sin and my actions, and that's I like see that on a daily basis too. Like I'm not patient, I get frustrated, and he's a baby. Like that's gonna happen.
Yeah.
And then sorry, the last piece is I'm really, to be completely honest, I'm so mad at God. um, and I'm mad because the whole conversation I've had, like the question I've worked out with myself of like how, like, why does God let bad things happen? Like that's something I not like have figured out, but like came to peace with a long time ago. And now there's this baby in my house that has lived through more than anyone I've ever known. How do I make that make sense?
Right.
And then how do I turn around and trust God with his future? But like, I feel like he didn't take care of his best. So, yeah, I'm over it now. I'm okay.
Okay, she has a little bit more, but I want to just stop there for a second. So, um, yeah, that's raw, right? And I think we could go ahead. If you know Maggie, this was like one of the scariest things she's probably ever done in her life. She doesn't love being in front of people. So, but I really appreciate it because I feel like it's honest. Like, if we're going to serve people, it's going to be hard. There's going to be times where it's going to challenge our faith. And you just don't know until you do it. Like, I don't think she would have ever guessed that fostering would have made her angry at God. But I would say, as a pastor, that that's good. Like that's part of the process. We're going to hear about that in a second. But all of that is like that's one of the reasons I think that God calls us to serve the least of these is because he needs to get us out of our comfort zones and into places where we can be stretched. Growth doesn't happen when we're just comfortable, right? So there's something that God is doing in Maggie's life, and in the little boy's life. We don't say his name because it's recorded and we're not allowed to. Just so you know, I do know the kid's name, not just like a jerk up here, but we're not saying it for the recording. So, but God does that work in our lives, right? So I wanted to acknowledge that because some of you might be, might be in that place. And I believe that that's not like, it doesn't exclude you from the rest of the stuff we're going to say in this teaching, okay? I think it's part of the process. Um, she also wanted to share some good things. So let's watch the last like minute.
I want to talk more about the first question that you sent me about like in what ways has this grown me and like in what ways has this been positive. But I mean, I feel like the biggest one is like the whole center of my universe changed. Like there's this like little sunshine boy that is like running around my house and is so cute and giggly. And I think one thing that's really cool about foster care and raising a child who's like impacted by trauma is you get to see like I get to see him grow so much. And I don't know, I feel like I've become way more appreciative of like little things. And I don't know, like now he'll when he gets hurt he like asks me to like kiss his boo boos. And so just seeing him grow and the amount of love that he's added to my life and like gentleness and like softness to my spirit is like nice. Sorry, Abby is like falling apart in the background.
So her sister, they lived together, and her sister was an emotional support for the interview, but then she started sobbing during that part. So that wasn't super helpful. Um, so yeah, and you can hear me like originally it's a Zoom call, so I cut my face out of it so you didn't just see me doing like this the whole time. But you can hear me once in a while being like, okay, so yes, serving people is hard. In fact, Jesus talks about this. He says, this is how we know what love is. Jesus laid his life down for us. He doesn't, right? I mean, he's not sugarcoating it. Love is sacrifice. Love is often painful. Love can be death. It can certainly be a death of certain parts of our life, right? It can be a death of our pride, a death of our comfort, a death of feeling like we're in control. But sometimes when you really give yourself to serving other people, there's a loss of control there. And I think we all like to have a form of control. So that part's acknowledged. Now let's take the next step. So it's not easy, right? Serving others isn't easy, but I would say that it does change our life. And maybe, just maybe, because it's not easy, okay? Maybe that's part of the recipe. So there's two things I'd say. First is we begin to become like Jesus. That's one of the ways it changes us. By serving him, we begin to do what Jesus does, and so we begin to become like him. Jesus is serving. Like that's where he is. He is laying his life down. And we could do scripture after scripture about this. But I think like a friend of mine asked this question one time, like, how do you become humble? And the person, it wasn't a friend of mine, I lied. It was a podcast I was listening to, sorry. And the other person said, I think that you become humble by doing what you think humble people might do. And I love that answer because like no one's going to be like, "Oh, I'm humble." But I think we do pray like God make me humble. And really I think it's good to pray God make me like you, make me Christ-like, make me like Jesus. But maybe it's more than that. Maybe it's just doing what you think Jesus would do in a situation over and over and over and over and over again for the rest of your life until you become more and more like Jesus. And sometimes you fake it till you make it, right? So you might not want to serve that person, but you step into that and you do it enough times, the desire starts to grow to be that kind of person. You actually start to change. And so when we imitate Christ, we start to become like him. So I've asked my friend Dave to share a short testimony here. Dave's been, well, I don't want to give your whole story. You can talk about what you do. I mean, Dave's been volunteering with Paris Foundation for years. And so I just asked him to share how serving other people has made him more like Jesus. There you go. Oh,
Thanks.
there you go.
Good morning, everybody. Hi. So, if this seems rambling and like Christian just surprised me with this, that's not true. He gave me upwards of 48 hours, but
Reasonable.
but for things like this, I don't like to write down and script what I'm going to say. I want it to feel more genuine. So, if I feel like I don't have a specific train of thought, it's because I don't. Like Christian mentioned, one of the ways I've served for a number of years is through an organization called the Paris Foundation, and some of you are familiar with that because CityLight has supported them for a few years now as well. My family came to CityLight from the church where the folks who started Paris Foundation were members as well. So they're people I've known for a long time, um, people I was close with, and they're not superheroes. Like, I think when we talk about serving being hard, it is, but it doesn't have to be all the time. We don't have to make it hard. We don't have to make it seem like you need to be special in order to serve. Um, they were people who lived in the Elkton area, and they became aware of a gentleman named Les Paris, who on his own would go out to Marina Park off Bridge Street in Elkton and would just feed people because he knew there were people that lived in tents in the woods under that bridge, and they needed food and they needed clothes. And when he had clothes, he would bring clothes. And they became aware of this and they started to go out and assist with this. And it became a weekly thing, became a daily thing. And eventually, Mr. Paris died, and Bob and Tracy, who started the Paris Foundation, began a formal organization and named it after him. And that's where the Paris Foundation comes from. And they've seen it grow to, they feed on a daily basis upwards of 100 people through the support and generosity of churches like CityLight, of other local organizations, of families. And basically, they have people adopt a day of the week, or a day of the month, rather, and provide food. And some people can provide money toward buying that food. Some people can pack the food into paper bags. Some people can deliver it to Paris Foundation and drop it off. Some people can stay and pass it out to the guests. There's so many different ways to serve. But the key is, like Christian continues to say, that the reason we serve is because that's what Jesus did. Christian mentioned right at the beginning the verse that's found in both Matthew and Mark that says, "I came not to be served, but to serve." And I feel like that's one of the mottos of the church. When we talk about CityLight, CityLight isn't Christian and Mandy and the worship team and the people you see up here. CityLight is you guys. Okay? And if people talk about CityLight as a church and what does CityLight do as a church, they're talking about what you guys do, not just what these guys do. So getting out there and serving and acting the way Jesus acted is what people are going to see from CityLight. Okay? It's not just watching sermons online every week or how good was the music today. It's what we do as a church body that says what CityLight is in our community, determines whether they're going to miss us if we're gone. Okay? When you ask me to talk about things, you're going to get sports analogies. So here we go. And Christian touched on this a little bit as well. I feel like when we talk about serving being hard, but also wanting to do it to make us more like Jesus, among the many things I've done in my life and continue to do in my life, one of them is I'm a golf pro. Okay? So I teach people to play golf. I give golf lessons. And one of the ways to get good at golf or at other sports or other endeavors is to watch people who are good at it and imitate what they do. And that's what we're doing with Christ when we serve. We watch the example he gave. More locally, more proximally, we can watch other people around us who are good at it. Okay? And I think sometimes we lean too much, or sometimes we can even hide behind the idea of spiritual gifts. So, I don't have the gift of service, so I'm not going to try and serve. Well, you don't have to have a specific giftedness in service in order to serve people. You can use what your physical, earthly gifts are. You can use one of the other ways that I serve is there's another organization called Mark Inc. Ministries. It's very special to me that again came from the church that we were at previously. And several of you in here know why it's special, but I won't get into that. But one of the things I do is I help run their golf outing every year as a fundraiser in the fall. And I do it because not because I'm gifted at serving, but because I have expertise in golf. And it's a way that I can plug in and be a benefit to them and can serve in that way. Some of you may be accountants for a living, and every charitable organization needs somebody to do their books and to keep track of their finances, and you can volunteer to do that. There's unbelievable ways to serve that involve nothing about being in front of people or coming up on stage or whatever the case may be. You don't need to be in the spotlight to serve. If you don't have time, but you have money, you can give money. We know that. But look for ways to put your gifts into action, whether you feel like they're spiritual gifts or not. If you have expertise or you have experience in a certain area, talk to Christian at CityLight.org, at ourcitylight.org. There you go. So ask for ways that you can be plugged in. Right? Get involved in whatever way you can. And the other way you get good at something like golf, you imitate people who are good at it, and then you practice it. Okay? You get instruction. You ask for ways you can get better at something, and then you put it into practice. Okay? And that's how we're going to get closer to being like Jesus, is to do the kinds of things he did. I joked with Christian that he should bring the baptismal trough this morning and I would walk on the water and show you how much like Jesus I was. But that's not, obviously that's not what we're talking about. Okay? We want to live in the way he lived. We want to do the kinds of things he did. And when we spend our time and our energy and our resources doing things like serving others, then we have less time to do the kinds of things he didn't do or wouldn't do. Okay? So look for opportunities. That's the number one thing. Don't wait for them to come to you. Figure out ways that you can be of service, whether it's to your neighbor, to your coworkers, to someone inside of CityLight. There are numerous organizations. I'm blown away constantly by the number of nonprofit organizations that have been founded in this church, given the size of the church. Like I told you, explain a little bit of the background of Paris Foundation. I know 1-in-7B, Mark Pewican, has a very similar story. He wasn't looking to start an organization. He wasn't feeling like a superhero. He got connected to a ministry in Wilmington, and he went and spent the night there. And the next thing you know, he's created an organization himself. He's carrying that torch. And that's the kind of thing it takes. The willingness to step out in faith, to use the gifts you have, and to use your connections to other people. Serving is hard. It can be scary. Don't feel like you have to do it by yourself. One of the things that CityLight does is once a month at a little black church in Newark called St. John, we pass out food that they go and acquire, and we pack it in bags and hand it out to people. And they need 2 of us per month to do that. So grab a friend and say, hey, we're going to do it next month. And don't make it scary. Just say, hey, we're going to go have fun, and we're going to serve people at the same time. And there's just so many opportunities like that. So ask for them, pray about it, be in the Word, and look for examples around you of how people are serving and how they make you feel like they're imitating Christ, and how can you do the same thing. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Good job. That's how you know you're a son of a preacher, is when on the cuff you can make 3 points and have them all flow together. And that was good, Dave. Thank you so much. Okay, so serving others changes our lives because it makes us like Jesus. I like what Dave was saying about how you find someone to imitate and then you practice what they're doing, not just Jesus, but even other people who are serving, right? And so I think that's true about a lot of things in life, and that's also true about this. And the more we do it, the more we become like him. And then the last thing I would say, or the second thing, is that not only does it make us like him, it makes us closer to him. And I think that serving other people brings us into proximity with Jesus himself. And we start to, like, sometimes I think we're like, man, I wish I was closer to Jesus. And yes, we should read our Bibles and pray. Like, I wholeheartedly believe in the spiritual disciplines and that whole interior life. But also, it's not less than that, but it is more than that, right? Like, James tells us that if we don't add works to our faith dies. And so there's something about doing that brings life to our faith. And I'll just read this verse to you guys, and then we'll have our last person come up. So this is Jesus talking, and he says, he's telling like a parable, which you guys are probably familiar with at this point. And he says he talks about this king. The king will say to those on his right. So he talks about how at the end of time, God's going to separate people into sheep and goats. He's using that metaphorically. We're not actually going to turn into sheep and goats at the end of time, okay? So he separates them metaphorically. And what's the difference? He says to the ones who he was blessing, come, all who are blessed by the Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me. And they'll say, the righteous will say, Lord, when did we see you hungry, or feed you, and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you as a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go to visit you? And the king will reply, truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. And there's something about when we humble ourselves, when we serve other people, especially those in need, we're meeting Jesus in that moment. I know that's metaphorical. Like, he's not saying he was actually like that person, right? Like, he's all the poor people that we've served, and he's, hiding behind their face or something weird like that. But like, he is, like, we are approaching Jesus when we do that. And as we serve other people, we get closer to him. We start to understand his heart for us and for other people. We start to understand who he is and what he believes, or not believes, but what he values, what the kingdom of God values. So it's super powerful. I think, the theme is that serving other people isn't just like a thing you do. And it's something that God does in us too. And so, Monica, I just want to invite you to come up to be our final guest. And she's the complete opposite of Dave, in which she wrote hers down. And Monica, if you haven't met Monica yet, Monica is the one who makes the incredible wood burning and leather burning stuff, and has helped us a whole lot. Hey, thanks.
Hi, everybody. I'm Monica. Can you hear me okay? Okay. Yes, I wrote all mine down because I will cry and I will forget what I'm saying. So I've been a Christian for 34 years. I became Christian when I was 19. But my faith has grown more in the last 11 months than all the years put together. My husband, Tim, and I lost our 21-year-old son, Nathan, last July to suicide. Nathan was an amazing, gifted leader. He was the president of his class in college, a pilot before he could drive. But he suffered with a mental illness for 2 years due to COVID restrictions in his military college. It rocked our world and tested my faith more than I could have ever imagined. I remember the morning after he died, I have a picture by an 8-year-old girl of Jesus on my wall, and I looked at the picture of Jesus and I said, I am so mad at you. And because I'd prayed for my children every day of their lives. And I'd read the Bible with them every day of their lives when they were at home. And they'd all given their lives to God at a very young age. I just kept screaming, why, for months. I didn't know that a person could be in so much spiritual and emotional pain and still live. Romans 10:17 says that faith comes by hearing, and hearing the word of God. Now, I'd made a practice of reading the Bible every day of my life for 34 years. Not all my habits are good, but that one is good. Most days I was in so much despair that I couldn't even function. But God sustained me with a peace that is difficult to describe as I grasped onto my faith. After 14 weeks, I was able to function somewhat, and I went back to my teaching job at the University of Delaware, and I felt much better. And then I started serving as Aiden's buddy, and it brought me so much joy just to even see him every week. And then we began holding community events on our farm. And again, we had joy. And we began serving as greeters, which was my husband's idea. And we had joy. And children's church and having a small group was also his idea. I did not want to do it. Sorry, small group members. And it's not so small. We had 42 people last week on our farm. Again, we just had so much joy through that. The night Nathan died, I had a moment of clarity. And I knew that I needed to go back into my previous career of mental health counseling. And this Thursday is my last day at the university, and I'm going full time into mental health work with kids and families. And I have so much joy. And like I counsel people for 3 hours, and it feels like 3 minutes. And that's when you know it's God. And Nehemiah 8:10 says that the joy of the Lord is our strength. And so every time I felt joy, I gained more strength to be able to heal. And I know that there's an incredibly clear, direct relationship between serving and joy. Barbara Bush, I think, says it well. After losing her daughter at 3, she said, "The death of a child is so painful, both emotionally and spiritually, that I wondered if my own heart and spirit would ever heal. And I soon learned that I could help myself best by helping others." When I think about the storm that God has led me through, I think about the movie Twister. Has anybody seen it? Where there's like a big, huge, they catch tornadoes, which is crazy. My husband does the same thing. It's crazy. They were in the last scene. They were tethered themselves to a pipe in the ground, a deep water pipe, and it almost sucked them up, but they survived. And that's how I have been feeling for the last 11 months. And God is my rock. He was what I was tethered to and still am. He is my whole life. He's my strength and my joy, my peace and my everything. Life is about trusting in God and his plan, even when it doesn't make sense. I choose God through every storm, and I choose to have faith in his plan and will serve him until my last breath. When my son died, my priorities shifted. I'd always believed in God and salvation and heaven, but now I never thought so much about what I really believed. My faith is firmly planted in God, and all of my time and my resources and my energy and my decisions belong to him. By serving, there is great joy and peace and strength. That's all. Thank you.
Worship team, you guys can come up. There's a lot there. Obviously, we can't cover all of that, and I really I appreciate when we can be real with each other. You know, this is what we talk about. This is a family, right? Like we love each other. We carry one another's burdens. I think that's what the Bible is all about. And what I love that she said, it's so funny because I was going to try to close with this thought, but is that, you know, one of the best ways to serve yourself is to serve other people. Is that what you said? Yeah. And I think there's like a lot of times we think, oh, I need, you know, whatever I'm going through, I need a break, or I need some time, or I need to and yes, like there are times when you need a break, and there are times when we believe in all of that. Like there's times when you need therapy. There's like you should be praying, you should get prayer. Yes. And not or, but and sometimes we have to just give. Like sometimes what your life is missing is you giving. And so, can you guys bring that stuff up? Yeah. So I know this ended up being a really emotional talk. I promise you, when I first thought about doing this, I wasn't thinking of like it being a super heavy-handed thing to get you to volunteer for 100 hours of service. That wasn't my goal. But we are gonna like create space for the next 2 months to do stuff, whatever you feel called to do, and log it in. But like sometimes I think it helps to not be doing stuff alone. So like as a church, we are going to actively be looking for ways to serve the communities we live in for the next 2 months, and just start praying and looking for ways that you can do that, and see how God works in your life while you do it. See how he makes you more like him, and see how he changes you, and how you discover more of him, and you get closer to him.